wear high heels, I might just come pitching forward into the audience. Just put me back on my feet. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. This is my first time doing a signing in this area, and I think it's lovely, and I want to thank Abby. She messaged me on Instagram and said, would you like to come stay in my lake house? I mean, who could say no? So I was like, let me think about that, yes. And so we actually got to stay there last night, and it was lovely. She had a jacuzzi that we were in looking at the lake, and it was just gorgeous, so super sweet. And I wanted to reach Nadia Cakes because I had seen her post about them. And those of you who follow me know that I am like a cupcake queen. Like I'm constantly, yes, cupcakes. Everything is cupcakes with me, or now cookies too. I like crumble as well. And so I had to get to Nadia Cakes. So we were on a mission. I mean, we didn't even stop to eat when we left Michigan. We had this long drive, but we kept getting into construction, and it would slow us down, slow us down. So I'm watching my ETA get closer and closer to 8 o'clock when they close. So I messaged her, going, I'm going to miss it by just 2 minutes. And so she had her store stay open. Is that not the nicest thing ever? And I think her employees were probably that happy, but I didn't show it. They were very, very kind to me. And they let me in, and I got to check out the many flavors, and of course I had to get more than one, so we got 4, and then we dusted them immediately, and they were excellent, so I can add my voice to all of the accolades that she has already received, and then they wouldn't even let me pay for it, so I mean, is this not the hostess with the mostest? I mean, she's amazing. Those of you who are not aware of me, just let me tell you briefly before I read my excerpt how I got started. I got started, I never thought I would be a writer. I wasn't one of those people who had stories running around in my head, and usually when I'm with other authors, that's what they say. They say, oh, I always wanted to write, or I started when I was young. I thought I was business-minded. I didn't think I had a creative bone in my body, so I never planned this career. So it's kind of a few things happened that led me in this direction, and I'm so grateful that I have found it. I'm not grateful for some of the things that happened, and you'll see why in a sec. I caught my daycare provider drugging my children with cough syrup to get them to sleep all day while I worked as a loan officer. And it was just, you know, I thought this woman loved them. She was a member of my church. She would come over after hours. She would spend her money on them. I had no idea that there was danger here. And then, of course, you feel this terrible mother's guilt because you're their last line of defense. And so I quit my job to stay home with them. But my husband is a huge risk taker, and I am risk averse. You know how they say opposites attract? I am totally risk averse. And so when he wanted to leave commercial real estate and go into residential development, what do you think I said? No, please no. And he said, what if I sell them in advance, and so they're not spec homes? That sounds reasonable, right? I mean, takes the risk out of it. I couldn't see how we could lose. Well, let me tell you how it happens. So, he has 30 homes in various stages of construction, and the market just, the bottom fell out of it. So before we could finish them, all of our appraisals were coming in below our cost. And so you have 2 choices when that happens. You can keep it as a rental, but you have short-term financing, so that's not really a good option, or you can sell it at a loss. So poor Ted was selling everything at a loss and doing everything he could to try and save his business and working night and day, and that's when I find this happening to my children and feel like I cannot leave them. So I quit my job to stay home with them, but we needed money desperately, and I felt like I couldn't help, and so what do I do? So I was trying to think of something I could do from home, and my sister sent me Jude Devereaux's Knight in Shining Armor. Have any of you read it?
Yes.
No? It's an iconic romance book. Like, if you read a lot of romance, most people know it. So she sent it to me, and I wasn't really a genre reader. I just read widely, like everything from Jurassic Park to the classics. I didn't even know what genre was at that point. And so but I loved it. I knew I loved it. And when I shut the book, I remember thinking, I wonder if I can do this. This is something you can do at home with kids while they're napping. So I started the next day, and because I'm so brilliant, I decided to write a historical instead of what I knew already. So not only did I have to teach myself the craft, I had to teach myself everything about Victorian England. And the internet wasn't, I know, I don't look this old. But the internet hadn't started yet. And so I had no way to research online. I had to go down to Sac State. So after Ted would work 12 or more hours, I'd throw whatever babies were left awake at him and head down to Sac State, and those poor librarians would be like, oh, here she comes again. Because it was closing time, right? And they did not want me to come in at 5 to 9. And I'm there begging them for just a few more minutes, and carrying as many books as I can out to the car. So it wasn't the quick fix that I hoped it was. I mean, I should have known better from the beginning. It takes a while to write a book. But at night, I would lay down and think, but my book is good, I love my book, and that sort of saved my sanity through a very turbulent time. So, with that lead in, I will read you an excerpt of the latest. This is actually a kind of a milestone year, well, it is a milestone year for me in a couple of ways, and the first is that it's the 25th year since I signed my first book contract, publishing contract. And it went so fast, let me tell you. It just zipped by. And this is also my 75th book. So I've been doing 3 books a year for all those years. It's been a wonderful career. Once I started writing, I knew that I had found what I really wanted. So it was the silver lining to that dark time, because it's what led me to this. So let me read you a short excerpt from the new book. This is the first time they've had me read. That was kind of fun for them to ask. If I could get a job reading aloud, I would definitely do it, because I love it. Ariana felt herself tense. The possibility that Cam might have had something to do with the 12-year-old who'd gone missing when they were in high school still gave her nightmares. She was surprised he'd be the one to bring her up, especially so casually. Was that a good sign, or the sign of a complete psychopath? Your wife thinks you might be responsible for what happened, even though Ivy and she couldn't bring herself to finish that sentence, but he jumped in at that point, saving her from trying to force the recalcitrant words from her throat. Yes. Why? Ariana asked. Because of the rumors, because I was a person of interest in the past. She'll bludgeon me with any weapon she can. But you're not a person of interest now, Ivy said. Not that I know of. Ariana shifted in her seat. You haven't heard from the police. They've stopped by once or twice, he replied, but I think they're just poking around, asking questions. They're under pressure to solve the case. I get that, but seeing them at the house freaks Melanie out. He sighed. I don't like it either. Believe me, the last thing I want is for the investigation to focus on me again. It was bad enough the first time, but she's only making it worse by saying weird stuff. Like, Ariana prompted, like I'm so aloof she doesn't really know me, or like I'm so aloof she doesn't really know me, or I only married her because of Camilla and would leave her if we didn't have a child together. He waved a hand. It goes on and on. I'm dealing with enough doubt and suspicion. I'd like to be able to rely on my wife to trust me. Must be hard to feel she doesn't, Ariana agreed. It is, he said. There are other people on the island, people I've known most of my life, who are watching me closely too, like I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing. Being one of his doubters made Ariana feel slightly guilty. How could she? He'd been a good friend to her. She'd allowed the what-ifs that had cropped up since leaving the island to overshadow all her reasons for believing in him. But maybe that would change now that she'd returned. To feel absolutely secure in standing by him would lift a huge weight from her shoulders. He sounded sincere, truly tortured over what had happened to Emily Hutchins, and she felt terrible for what he was going through as a result. What if they'd been correct when they were in high school? What if he was completely innocent of any wrongdoing, and they'd stopped circumstances from making him a victim too? That was a possibility, but the opposite could also be true, and the consequences of what that would mean sent a shiver through her. What if they'd been wrong? There we go.
Wow.
You guys hear me? Is this mic working?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, your beginning. That was one of my questions. I have my questions on my phone. I'm not just like scrolling TikTok. And I'm going through and I'm deleting them. I'm like, she's answering my questions.
Yes, I interviewed myself.
That was an incredible introduction and such an incredible story. Very similar to mine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Last
So
night I was surprised by that.
Yeah, you were meant for this life. You really were. And you said, what do you know about writing? You're a businesswoman. You are really like the full package. You're both. Okay, I have so many questions, and I'm sure you guys have questions too. So I'm going to try and leave a few minutes at the end so that you can ask your questions. So think of them now. And I know we're all introverts, and you don't want to raise your hand and ask questions, but we're going to do that. Okay. Okay. So this book tour. This is exhausting to watch from 33 stops. That is incredible. And what number is this stop?
26.
Okay, so you're
27. I think it's 27.
Are you tired?
Not really. I paced myself. I'm very careful to always pace myself. And I just have been having much more fun than I ever dreamed. I thought it would be like a carnival ride where you get on and you can't get off. So if you don't like it, you're in trouble. Like if you feel like throwing up, you're just stuck. So I thought I might feel like throwing up most of this trip, but I haven't. I've been really glad I got on the ride, and I've met so many wonderful people and guest authors are in conversation partner authors that have been so kind and shown me their cool houses and had me stay with them, and we've got to talk shop, which is so fun for writers because I mean, we stay behind our computer most of the time. And Ted calls me his hobbit. I don't like leaving either, so I love that about what you said. He's Gandalf, always trying to whisk me away on an adventure. And Ted never met an adventure he didn't like, so opposites again. But yeah, no, I'm glad I did it.
Have you ever had a bad signing?
In my history? Oh, yes.
Okay, all right, I want to hear about that.
Okay, well, one of the first signings that I did, I was so excited because my publisher paid for a limo and flew me to Arizona, and my book was set in Arizona. I thought, this is going to be awesome. And so then I looked at the timing, and I'm like, wait, you're flying me into Phoenix, and the signing's in Tucson. We don't have time to drive down there. So they adjusted for me. So I thought all was good. So the limo picks me up, and I'm feeling pretty big there, going, oh, we're driving down to my first signing. And we get down there, and the bookstore had forgotten that I was coming. Oh. It was closed, and they were closing down their register. They had not ordered any books, and there were no people there. So it was me and their potbelly pig.
Okay, but the pig thing is actually kind of cool, but the rest of it.
That saved it. The pig saved it, for sure.
And, okay, so you have such a long history as an author. I mean, like, you've been part of RWA. You see, like, we were chatting last night, and when Brenda came to check into the lake house, it was very late, and I was like, I'm just going to check her in. I'm going to get her situated. I'm going to go home so they can get to sleep. No, we stayed like 3 hours, and I got home at like 12:30 at night. And it was just so fascinating talking to you because you've seen so many things. Truly, you're one of the most prolific authors out there. I'm very, very excited to be here meeting you today. Have you ever met anybody famous, like, throughout your author journey?
You mean famous as in authordom or like movie stars? I've met a lot of movie stars for some reason.
I want to hear. Okay, give me your most like writing adjacent experience.
Okay, well, I will tell you the time that I met somebody who is very key to the romance industry. I won't tell you who yet. So my publisher invites me down to LA, and they say that what they want to do is have this AIDS fundraiser. And it's at this beautiful, luxurious old hotel. And the young man who wants to vie to be a cover model, that's how they were going to raise money. Because back then, becoming a cover model was much bigger than it is now. I don't hear about that anymore. Must not be a thing. But anyway, so back then it was a big thing, right? Everybody was trying to become, this big cover model. And so these young, handsome men, very well built, are in tuxes, and they're walking around trying to solicit dances because you had to pay for a dance, and the person who got the most would win the contract. So my sister and I are sitting there, and we are looking at the young men, and this guy's cute, and that guy's cute, maybe he's a little taller, whatever. And as we're doing this, all of a sudden, stand up for this, the elevator doors open, and Fabio starts. I'm not kidding. I did not know he was going to be there. It was almost like the wind was blowing his hair. And I had never met him before, and I didn't know he was going to be there, so I had, this was unanticipated. And I wasn't a big fan, to be honest, because when I got into writing, the industry had kind of turned on him. Like, he got overexposed, and then everybody made a big joke of him, and so I kind of felt bad for him, and rather than admire him or whatever, I just kind of felt bad that ever happened to him. But let me tell you, he had such bearing and such presence that you would think, him being 25 years older than these young men, he would have disappeared and not been able to compete. They melded into the background. They weren't even there. And it was not because he was cocky. He was self-assured, but he was kind, and he just had this charisma. It was hard to explain the way his bearing was, and he really was appealing. So I was excited, and they said he would take pictures. So they had a whole corner that they set up for it with that umbrella light and everything, and I'm just this little housewife, so I'm like sidling up to him to get my picture, and he grabs me by the waist, and he holds me in. So we end up with a picture like this. So that's when I got to meet Fabio.
That picture will be on TikTok. You have 12 hours. We want to see this.
I looked so horrible in that picture that I let my web designer deep six it, but somebody else Googled it and it came up. So if you really want to see it, you can Google it.
I have a question for the group. So Brenda's been writing down how everything goes every day, and if you've been following, she put one of my jokes in there, and see if you can finish this.
Well, first, let me back up and give them the preface to this. They need a little context because a lot of these people may not be part of the group.
Okay.
How many know Ted and are part of Brenda Novak's book group? Okay, well then a lot of you will know that he tells dad jokes and does like bingo Ted for us, and now he's barista Ted, and so like and then he was hair coloring Ted on this trip. That was his most reluctant thing, but anyway, so he has a joke for you.
So I thought that my dryer was shrinking my clothes, but all along it's been my, has anybody seen this post? Refrigerator. I ordered a chicken and an egg off of Amazon. I'll let you know.
He's been such a good sport to do this with us. Hats off to Ted.
That was great. I just want to say, you two are like relationship goals. My husband also goes on book tour with me, and I'm like, that's gonna be us.
He is equally wonderful. This man came over last night, thought we were too cold, and didn't want us standing up, so he dragged out chairs in the garage for us to sit down because he and Ted were doing man stuff. And then he went and got coats for each of us, his coats, and made us put them on because it was chilly. He's super sweet.
He was working really hard to get the lake house ready for them, and wants me to tell you that he had 27,000 steps on his Fitbit. So, how do you stay inspired? So, 75 books. How do you keep that going? Because I have to tell you, I'm going to be really honest. The Seaside Library was my first book by you. Actually, it probably wasn't. I probably read you before, but it was back before, and I don't remember it. I was so impressed. It's like I knew when I was reading this book that I was in the hands of just an expert writer. There were points in this book.
Good.
Yeah, it was incredible, honestly. First of all, that cover, okay? This book is about murder. I don't know if you guys have read this book, but I was like, oh, this is going to be a cute, beach read. And I was like, no, it's murder. And I loved it. Like, there were parts of this book, at no point in time was I decided, like, you had me flip-flopping on these characters, and I was just, it was truly, I was in the hands of a master, and it was so...
That's so nice.
It was so cool to have that feeling, and it's just because you're so great at what you do. So how do you at your 75th book, how do you pull that out? And continue to deliver these amazing novels.
I think that your brain starts becoming a sifter. Yours probably does the same thing, right? Where everything you see, you're thinking, maybe there's a nugget there, or TV, or conversations, or, you'll even read somebody else's book, and maybe you'll take just a part of it, but you'll turn it on its head. You don't think, that would be cool if, and then you turn it upside down, so it's actually your own idea, completely different, but you got the nugget there. Mm-hmm. So I just am constantly, my nephew arrived, hi Travis. He's darling, isn't he? He came all the way from Utah to drive Ted and I, because we're exhausted driving through the night, so he's going to drive us to Iowa, because we have to be there by morning. So anyway, I think what keeps me driven is the wanting to write a better book every time. Mm-hmm. Like, you're constantly in pursuit of perfection, right? Like, it's got to get better, and nothing matters before, because you're done with all that, and it's got to be the next book. And so I think it's that constant challenge that makes me love my work, right? Because there's always, the bar keeps just raising where you're like trying to reach. And so you just search and search, and it's kind of funny because you do get a lot of people going, I have an idea for you. Like, if you'll write it, we'll split the proceeds. Well, the writing's the hard part, I hate to tell you.
Okay, so we talk about nuggets, and that's very accurate. Like, people ask me, how did I get an idea? And it starts with this tiny little kernel, and it just goes from there. What was the nugget for this book?
I just love the idea of the buried secret and doing something that for the right reason, but it was wrong. You know what I mean? You did something wrong for the right reason. Like, I love exploring kind of that morally gray area. And I liked the idea of setting this on an island because you have these three kids who've grown up together, and to them, things would seem so transient, right? Because this isn't a normal kind of island where people stay all year. It's an island that has the 4 seasons, and it gets cut off and gets fog, and so people rush in when it's sunny and wonderful, and then they ebb out with the tide when it's winter. So you can imagine as a child, you'd make friends, you'd have fun, all this is going on, and then all of a sudden it just whooshes right back out, right? So it's almost like grabbing a handful of sand, and the harder you squeeze, the more it comes through your fingers, and you can't hang on to anything. So I thought that would make you very close to the people who stayed, because they're what's stable in your life. That's who you can depend on. So I thought, in that situation, if one of them were accused of something heinous, like what happened to the little girl that goes missing, and I'm not giving a spoiler away, you know that at the beginning, what would you do? You know, and so when the two girls step up, I mean, they're in high school, they don't know how this is going to impact their whole lives. So of course they're like, nope, Cam was with us, Cam was with us. Well then, at first that would draw you closer probably, because you have this big secret and you protected each other. But then as life goes on and certain things develop, there's some cracks in the relationship as the doubt seeps in, right? And you're thinking, did I do the wrong thing? Did I deny justice to this family? But if I come clean now, I could make Cam go to jail just because I lied. Like, my guilt could sort of transfer on him. This is a police department that's not that, you know, used to solving murders. And so they may think, well, he was the only suspect back then. He's our only suspect now. They've admitted he no longer has an alibi. Boom. You know, so they have some difficult decisions to make. And that's why I love that you said you were going back and forth, because that's what I would be doing as the girls too, thinking, do I come forward? Do I not come forward? Oh no, yes, no. So it kind of put in that situation.
Yeah, it was, honestly, it was a very morally challenging book. Like you said, the gray areas, and there were times where I was like, gosh, you know, if even just the suspicion of guilt was enough to ruin that man.
Yes.
And that really weighed heavily on the characters and me as a reader. You know, because you ask yourself, what would I do in this situation? And that changed for me so many times throughout this book. It was, honestly, it was such a wonderful ride to be on. It was just a fabulous book. Fabulous. So, okay, how do you research for a book like that? Because that's a lot of criminal aspects, a lot of legal aspects. What kind of research do you do?
Well, I'm one of those people that I love research, so if I start the research first, I just will never stop. I just go down that hole and then just keep learning everything I can. And then I try and teach it to everybody in the book. So I put in everything I learned, and it may not even be pertinent to the story, but you're gonna find out this awesome information that I found. So I can't do that. So what I do is I write to something that I don't know, I fake it, and I mark it. And then I keep going, and then I research only what I need at the end to make sure that I was accurate in all those points. But I had the help of having written many books before, so I did have somewhat of a framework of knowledge. I mean, I didn't just launch out into the dark. I had that, and I also got to visit Nantucket for the first time, because in my online book group, the months I don't have a release, I feature other authors, and I'm trying to twist Abby's arm to get her in there next year. But I did Nancy Thayer, who lives on Nantucket, and Lexi and I flew to Nantucket to interview her and see her home and everything. And so we loved getting to do that, and Nantucket is a very special place. I mean, that's why so many people write books about it and read books about it, but there were so many people who could write about it so much better than I could, because they lived there, right? Like, I've been there once, so I didn't think I could write with any authority, and I also kind of felt like I was encroaching on somebody else's space. But I wanted to do a cool island that was similar, so I created Mariners, and it's located near Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, but then I can kind of create, you know, what I want to do with it. And so that was kind of part of the fun for me, and part of the idea of getting this book going was when I went to Nantucket, I'm like, oh, I would like to write a beach read, you know, about an island like Nantucket that has the 4 seasons. And the next book, next year, is called Tourist Season, and it's going to be set on Mariners, but it's not connected to this book, although the library is still there, of course.
And that was another one of my questions, is what's coming next. So can you tell us a little bit about that book, or is it too soon?
Yeah, no, I just finished it, and it's 550 pages. My editor is going to have an absolute cow, because she just wrote me about the other book I turned in that's too heavy, and she said, you know, we have to go up in price point when, she goes, and we don't want to go higher, you know what I mean, if it goes longer, they have to pay higher printing fees, and I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that. So anyway, we'll have to trim that one down. But it's about a woman who just graduated from UCLA Law School, just passed the bar. She is engaged to a guy who is just taking the 3rd part of his medical exams to become a medical doctor. And then they each have 2 months off, and they are going to go back to LA, well, I haven't even told you, they're going to go for the 2 months to Mariners to stay in his mother's lovely summer cottage. And then they're going to have a great time together. You know, if they got all this hard work behind them, then they'll go back for his residency and start their lives. Well, she starts out ahead of him. He sends her off because he can't focus to study, and he's got this big test, and then he's going to join her in a couple weeks, and then they'll have 6 weeks together. Well, she gets there, and this outlandish storm hits. It's not even hurricane season, and so totally unexpected, knocks out the power, and she's thinking, I got to get some light. I don't even know the layout of this house very well. So she finds some candles, and she's looking for matches, and this home has been completely gutted and renovated recently, so there's not a lot of stuff in the drawers. But she thinks, you know, his room wasn't a room that was really renovated. Maybe he's got matches up there. Maybe he smoked dope when he was a kid. Who knows? So she goes in the closet and she's, you know, feeling around, and she finds something that makes her question whether she should continue this relationship. And Bo, the caretaker, comes over to help out, and anyway, it goes from there.
And we have to wait how long for this?
Next April comes out. It's my every April.
So you do 3 books a year, right?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
typically, but now I'll probably be going down to 2. But for this next year, I have 3 romances coming out before that beach read. So it's going to be a big year for me. 5 releases, because they stockpile them, and I only had 1 this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I cannot wait to, can I have it early?
Yeah.
I will not be waiting.
For sure.
So do you use sensitivity readers for your books or advisors?
No, the publisher kind of does that, which is probably a good thing, because I can be kind of oblivious, and so they do check me on certain things. Like I was still using the word crazy. I didn't even know, you know, like, oh, that's crazy, and they're like, no, that's not nice. So I have to be checked sometimes. So I'm like, oh, okay, then I remove them.
So how long did it take you to write this book?
4 months.
Is that about your average? 4
Yeah,
months?
4
Yeah.
months.
And how do you develop your characters? Do you do like a character storyboard? You write their name and then all their characteristics, or do you just sort of get to know them in your head?
Yeah, I just sort of get to know them in my head. I start every book with the conflict. To me, my books have a lot of conflict, which is why it's so hard to find a good cover. And I think that's what you were alluding to when you said, have you seen this cover and then what's in it? I love things with lots of conflict. To me, that's the engine that drives the story forward and makes it a page turner. So like I love things like Game of Thrones and Outlander. And I mean, if you read that, there's just so much crazy stuff going on in those books. And it makes the happy ever after so much more enjoyable, because they got through so much stuff to get there. So anyway, I write with a lot of conflict, and so that's what I start with. I think of some juicy, really great conflict that I really want to write about, and that gets my imagination going, and then I pick a couple of characters I think will be most challenged by that conflict, and then I get to know them as I start writing, and sometimes that will require going back and polishing a little differently, you know what I mean, to remain consistent. But that's and then I do 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. Like I have to get my foundation in first. I'm not one of those writers who can say, oh, I write like the ending and then I write this one, just whatever in the mood for. Kristen Higgins told me that. I'm like, you do what? Because I would they would all be wasted. I would just shoot off and completely miss them somehow, you know? So I'm like, that's interesting. Everybody has their own process. How do you do it?
I think I write my book in my head, entirely in my head. I don't write a single thing down. And then once I know my book completely in my head, then I sit down and I write it in chronological order from start to finish. So, and it really is interesting how everybody really does do it differently. Like some people need very bullet-pointed synopsises. You know, they've got every chapter mapped out, and it's fascinating. That's one of my favorite questions to ask an author.
I actually went to a writer's conference, and I was so excited to hear this big-name male suspense writer talk, and so I'm there with my notepad, you know, I'm going to learn from this guy, and he said, if you do not plot, you do not write a good book. And I'm like, sliding into the chair. Because I'm like, I can't plot, because if I know the ending, I telegraph it. I'm so transparent. So like, you guys would know it. And then it turns out to be a lot of flat, emotionless writing, which is boring, right? So I can't know. I have to be excited and surprised each day to see what's going to happen in my book. And Ted will often ask me, do you know who did it? I'm like, nope. No spoilers, because I don't know myself. Which makes a challenge for the ending, you know, because you get a puzzle going, and I'm really good at making messes, which is what I call the conflict. I make a big mess, and then you have to figure out some way to believably wrap it up and give that feeling of the denouement, you know, that, okay, yes, it all makes sense. I wasn't cheated as a reader, and I feel good. All my books end happy. That is a spoiler alert.
Well, and without any spoilers, you did a really good job with that in this book, because I did not know where it was going. And yeah, it was phenomenally done. I kept talking to my husband about it the whole time I was listening to it. I did the audiobook, which is also really great. You guys should check out the audiobook.
Abby has just gotten the job of interviewing me at every stop. She hasn't gone to kidnapping her.
So, do you have any tips for anybody in the audience who might be a budding writer themselves?
Yeah, you know, I learn by example best. And I think sometimes the temptation is to go out and read a bunch of how to write books, and maybe that'll work for you. Everybody's process is different, but it wouldn't work for me in the beginning, and I'll tell you why. It took everything that I did intuitively, and it shoved it over into that conscious side to where I was juggling so many balls and dealing with so many rules that I'd be like, oh, that's passive writing. Oh, that's changing POV. Oh, you know, so I would then, it would lock me up. So I had to, and I thought, I'm probably doing this wrong because you should educate yourself first. But I just did trial and error and wrote something I would love to read. And I used other books. There's plenty of examples of great books out there. And that's what I used as my, the way to learn is just learn by example. And then now I can read how-to books, which is ironic because now I've done it long enough that I can go, oh, that's what they mean by. And I can sort of tweak and improve that way. But it just leveled me if I started out that way.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I completely agree with that. And I think that was almost like a secret, maybe to both of our successes, was that we didn't have this like playbook on how to write a book. We just sat down and very organically wrote. And when I was, learning how to write on Critique Circle, all the rules that people gave me really did make my writing feel stiff, and I actually had to go back and fix some of that stuff after the fact. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, because they will be quick to tell you can't do that. That's breaking a rule, and then you just sort of get yourself in this little box where you're like, I can't do anything. So I love just letting myself write, and even if you start sometimes, I think, thinking about how your readers, if they'll like it, you can't write to please other people. It just locks you up. But if you write something you love and you're excited to go to it every day and you're page turning, you just have to hope there's enough people who are like you and like what you like, right? Because that's the best you can do is write something you love, that you would love to read.
This is all great news because I do all the same things you do. So now I know that I have 75 books in me.
You do great, yes. And you started right out of the gate, way better. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here if after 25 years, you think about the certain turning points that brought you here. And I would have been a one-book wonder if not for one thing. And I started my historical career, and I did sell that first book that I wrote, which is pretty good. I was excited about that. So I thought, I'm off and running. I'm going to be a historical romance author. And I turned in 2 other manuscripts to my editor, and she said, I love them. As soon as I get back from vacation, we'll go back to contract. I'm thinking, I'm off and running. And so, meanwhile, I go to this little conference in Park City, Utah, and there was an editor there from Harlequin. Her name was Paula Eichelhoff, and she was taking pitches. And I never miss an opportunity. That's how I try and safeguard against failure, because I don't want to fail. So I think, what can I do to hedge? I'm always hedging. And so I thought, I'm going to pitch this woman a book. So I thought of, a contemporary. I'd never thought of one. So I thought of a story real quick. I go in with this panel and I pitch it. And I did terrible. I slaughtered it. But she was very, very kind, and she would guide me back, and talk about, oh, well, you said this. And she's a very, very lovely person. So when I got home, I sent her a thank you note and a box of candy and just said, you're making a difference in the industry. Never planned on writing anything for her, because I thought I had this great historical romance career going. And so then she called me up. And it was like, at that point, you're so powerless. And it was before self-publishing, so you had no other option but to get through that gate. And she was the gatekeeper. So it was like hearing from God, So you're like, and you're like sweating and you're tongue-tied. And she's saying, are you ever going to turn in that book that you pitched to me? And I'm like, well, the answer was no, but I knew what the right answer was. So I was like, yes, I'm going to turn that in. And she said, well, I can't do firefighter stories because I've already, got somebody doing that. Do you have anything else? And again, I had 0, but I knew the right answer. She said, yes, lots of ideas. And I'm praying she doesn't ask me right on the spot to pitch one because I had nothing. And she said, well, write them up, and we'll meet for breakfast at RWA, and you can pitch it to me. And I was like, so, I hang up, I'm so thrilled, and so I go to RWA, and I do my pitches, and she buys her favorite, and then she goes on to buy everything I could produce, up through more than 60 books through all these years, and the reason why that is important is because my other editor came back from her month in Europe to a pink slip, and HarperCollins was buying Avon, and what they wanted was their romance department, so they axed all their own romance editors and all their own romance authors, unless you were a big name, and I didn't even have my first book out yet. I was Brenda who, they didn't care about me. It's like, you're gone. So I would have just had the one book out, but luckily, because I had done that one thing, I was able to segue and write these, write for Harlequin and start down that path and continue to, help make a living.
I literally have chills. That was fate intervening on your behalf. But not just fate, you manifested that. You really did. That's
very lucky.
That is a very good lesson, though, to learn that you never turned down an opportunity. Like, you went for it, even though you didn't have anything prepared. You just went for it, and then you did the classy thing, and you sent her chocolate.
No, chocolate can go so far, right? And this woman was so important that I wanted to. What she bought me for were the little skinny romances that come out every month, and you don't make a lot of money for those. And your real dream, if you want to become well-known author, is to get back into single title. And I'm thinking, how am I going to do this? So I thought, I know, I'll write a book that's so good but doesn't fit the line, and she'll have to make it a single title. That was the only way I knew how to do it. So I pitch her this story idea at RWA, and I pitch it to my agent, and they both say, write it. So I go home and write it, and I think it's the best thing I've written. I'm so excited, and they send it in, and my agent calls me, and she goes, this is a prison book. And I'm like, what part of prison didn't you understand when I pitched it to you? Like, it was a prison book then too. Like, I'm shocked, right? Astounded. And she's like, it's dark. It's suspense. Suspense is dark. So I was just blown away and hurt, of course, because you're like, oh, it's terrible. So I'm in tears and I'm ready to throw the whole thing away. And I'm like, oh, this sucks. I called Paul up. I said, I'm not going to submit it to you. It's the worst thing I've ever written. I thought it was the greatest. Who knew? So I said, Karen hates it. She doesn't want to send it to you. And she goes, Brenda, I'm the one who buys your books. Send it to me. So I sent it to her, and she loved it so much that she passed it around the entire publisher. They loved it so much that they decided to make it a single title, and they invited me to come speak at Sales Conference, and I had people up in the hierarchy of the company who I didn't even know their name, let alone them knowing mine, and they were approaching me at RWA saying, we just read your book, and we love it, and we're going to make it a single title, and so it worked, but certainly didn't seem that way at first, so that was another turning point. If not for that, I wouldn't be here.
And what book was that?
Taking the Heat. Has anybody here read Taking the Heat? Yeah. Travis, have you read it?
Wow, that is just an amazing. I wish I had you here for like 3 weeks so I could just talk to you and ask you all these questions. But
We'd have a blast, and I'd be in your lake house.
so we have about 10 more minutes, so I think we can take a few questions from the audience, and I'll let you pick those. Raise your hand if you have a question for Brenda.
On this book tour, did you pick the cities because there was an author there that you wanted to meet? Or did that come after?
It kind of
you
went
chose the
after,
city?
so I got
Okay.
very lucky to get Abby because I did not know her previously. This is our first, we just barely got to meet. And because I've been around a long time, a lot of the other authors I have, they're closer to my age, and I have met them at various writer
Because I've seen
conventions. and
sometimes
things.
even some other people come that you don't even know were going to show up
Yeah.
at events too.
Yeah, oh yeah, some other
Yes.
authors who have
Yeah.
come to the
So
event
it's been really
themselves.
fun to watch.
Yeah.
Generally, you know,
That's
it's
been very
really
kind of them to come and support, and then it's been fun to get pictures with them, and yeah, so it's been this tour has been special. I mean, much more than I could have dreamed.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we picked up actually the PR company set up the tour. I hired a PR company because Alexa was like, not me, please God, because she's doing so much. My daughter works for me, and she's like working 9 days, so I got this PR company, and they set it up. And so they would be like, oh, how about doing two in 1 day? And I'm like, how far are they apart? And they go, 6 hours. And I'm like, well, how's that going to work? It takes 7 hours to do it from start to finish by the time you set up the book stream. You know, like, oh, well, we'll move one up an hour and one back an hour. You can do it. So that was, last Saturday. But they did a good job because, I mean, I've loved every partner author that I've had. I've loved all the people that have come out and the cities. Oh my gosh, I am now in love with the Midwest. Ted says I have to at least see it during the winter before I make a decision. I am close.
What is the next one?
It's
That
called
comes out?
Tallulah's Back in Town.
That's
Yep, and that'll be out. That'll be in our September box. If you're getting Brenda Novak's
Yeah.
book boxes, signed copies go in there, or you could get it. You can pre-order it here. I bet you could pre-order it here even. Yeah, and it'll be out at the end of August. Yeah.
So once you became an established author, were there any bad surprises that came to you that you weren't expecting? Like stalkers? Or
Well, I luckily no stalkers because I'm pretty transparent. Like, I'm afraid if I Google my own name, what would come up. But so nothing like that. I think the hardest thing to deal with at first was just that I was so thin-skinned and sensitive. We were kind of talking about this last night. Like, you put your baby out there and be like, okay, you're hoping everybody loves it and pets it. Oh, so cute, so cute. But some of them kick your baby and hate your baby. And you're like, oh my God, that's my baby, And so and you get a bad review and you're just like, I mean, Ted would come on and be like laying on the floor, and he'd be like, what's wrong? Like, did somebody die? No, read this. So it's just, you get a thicker skin and you realize not every book is for every person. Not everybody likes the same genres I do. Like right now, everybody loves futuristic. It's not my cup of tea. So I probably wouldn't be as prone to give a futuristic a glowing review if I read it, right? Because it's just not my genre. And sometimes you run into that too. Anybody else?
what's the last great book that you read?
Oh my gosh, I've read so many good books because I do a new book each month. The Time of Her Life is going to be my June read, so I just finished that. Really enjoyed it. That's by Sandra Kitt. And I am definitely diving into yours truly, because I cannot wait to read that on my way home. And Ted wants me to read it aloud to him as we drive. So that will be fun. That's how I edit. I finish my book and I will read it all aloud to him as he drives, and it helps me find. Do you do that too? Steer the sisters up here. Yeah, and it helps because you find clunky language, repetitions, and then you can weed all that out before you send it in. Yeah. So, yeah.
Is Barista Ted in any of your books?
Barista Ted is in all my books. No, seriously, if you put an entire human being in your book, they would be because human beings are so inconsistent, they would not read believably. So it's a huge irony that you have to simplify it and to make them consistent. So you can take a trait, I can take various traits of Ted and they can be part of my hero or a character. Or if you take that trait and then you amp it up a lot, it could be the villain, right? Because too much of any one thing can be bad. Yeah. Anybody else?
What did your kids think of you becoming a famous writer?
My kids have been really wonderful and supportive, especially Alexa, who works for me. She has done so much in the past 7 years. But I will tell you that when they were younger, my baby Thad is in 8th grade, and he had a girl come to school with one of my books, one of my romances, and read the sex scene to him. Completely out of context. Luckily, it wasn't Trey, because Trey is my straight arrow dental student son. He probably would have blown a gasket. Thad just laughed. Did I see any other hands?
What was your favorite moment from this trip?
My favorite moment. Well,
So
hearing
far.
Abby say how much she loved my book, I think is my favorite moment. I honestly do. Yep, that's my favorite moment. Anybody else?
Are you gonna write a book about this experience?
Actually, my publisher mentioned that to me. They said, your next book should be about an author on tour. And I said, but it's also nice. Who would want to read about everything that's nice? Where's the conflict in that? And then I started thinking about things that could go wrong. And I started thinking, and then I was jogging and I saw something on TV that gave me one of those light bulb moments. And so I almost fell off my treadmill trying to run and text Ted so I didn't forget it. Because he's like, text it to me, so I don't forget titles or whatever. So I'm texting and running. And, so I think I might be able to come up with something good for that. Yes. Anybody else? One more, yeah.
I know you've written, 75 books?
Uh-huh.
Do you plan on writing another 25 books?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. She's referring to, if you read 50 or more of my books, you get a little Swarovski crystal pin that says BN 50. So we send that out for free as a thank you for so much support. And so now that I've hit 75, people are like, what are you going to do for me now? So I need to come up with at least a different color of pin. It'd be cool to be able to collect them, and then for 100. So I'm hoping to get up there. We'll see. I mean, old authors never retire. They just...
Every single one of your books. So,
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you. Just have a big bookshelf. Well, if that's the last question, I have one more story I wanted to share with you. And I wanted to tell you about the time that my publisher sent me down to be on a reality TV show. Did you know I was on a reality TV show? Yes. You remember? Oh my gosh, this is the first person. So they wanted me to be the judge of these young men, again, about vying for the cover model. It was really big back when my kids were little. And so they asked me to go down there, and I was hesitant, though, because I thought, everybody wants to make romance about sex. And it just, if you go on TV, they'll only have you on Valentine's Day, they cue the corny music, they snicker through it. It's like they're laughing at you and your readers. I just didn't enjoy it, and I didn't think it was cool, and they don't understand the genre if that's what they think of it anyway, right? The sex is wonderful, but there's sex in lots of genres, and it's the icing on the cake. It isn't the cake. There's a great cake in there, and that's important. And so anyway, I just wasn't that down with it, but they said, no, you'll be judging athletic events. I like sports. I'll judge athletic events. That would be cool. So I get down there, and the first thing they do is put me in a toga. And I'm like, well, wait, Greece, Olympic events, toga. Okay, I'll go along with the toga. And they said, does your sister-in-law and your niece want to be your princesses? And I asked them, and they were really down with being on TV, so they said yes. So I said, okay. And so I'm like, all right, let's get to these sporting events. And they said, well, we have a little news for you on that. We're not going to do sporting events anymore. We've changed our mind. We're going to do a wet t-shirt contest. And I'm like, jaw dropped, going, oh, like there's no getting out of this. My publisher's already flown me down, director, everybody's there, lights, whatever. And so I'm like, oh. And how does that work exactly? And they said, well, we'll douse them with water and you fill their chest and you pick the best one. Like, no, I'm not touching anybody. But I asked my intrepid princesses and they said, we will happily touch them. So I said, great, we have volunteers. So they will handle the touching. So these poor young men, it was freezing and their lips were blue because you wouldn't believe LA can get cold, but it was so cold that day. Their lips were blue. They have on t-shirts, they're shivering. I mean, they're hugging themselves like this with goosebumps, and then they're dousing them with water. And my princesses are feeling their chest. And I'm like going, oh, okay, I gotta get through this. So we get through that and they ask me my opinion on all of this. I think it's my opportunity to tell them what our genre is really about. And so I tell them, romance is a genre with deep moral underpinnings. The sex is usually between two monogamous people who fall in love, they have a happily ever after, they start a family, and the readers are not people who are living vicariously through romance novels. These are happily married women who are getting to fall in love again. We usually only get to fall in love once or twice in our life, and this enables us to fall in love again and again and again, and you get that wonderful happily ever after. So I said all of this thinking I saved the day. I was so proud. So then I go home and get my popcorn, my little kids, and then, the show comes on. It was on Oxygen Channel, and guess how much of that made it into it? None of it. They made it as salacious as possible. So I have a reader who comes to my events often and reminds me, I've got those all on tape. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that.
Well, that is the perfect story to end this on. Thank you to everybody who came out to see me or registered. For the rest, I know many of you got your bags and I was able to personalize and take pictures with you already, but if you haven't, don't worry, we will stay as long as you need us to. But what we will do is Abby will sign her books in here and I will go out to the book stream so that I can personalize yours and get pictures because yours are all signed. I did that in advance so that if people didn't want to wait, they could still get a signed book and jam if they wanted to. So I will go out there and Abby will be at the table